This is Vienna, 1913.
In 1913, Vienna was the most sophisticated capital in Europe, a metropolis of more than 2 million inhabitants that glittered with the twilight splendor of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The city found itself at a unique moment in history, a place where the ideas that would define the 20th century were being conceived in coffeehouses, medical offices, artist studios, and homeless shelters. In this video, I use modern AI tools to bring historic paintings, maps, and period engravings to life, shifting perspectives, changing camera angles, and moving through these scenes in ways their original artists never could have imagined. The goal is not simply to observe the past, but to step into it, to walk through the Vienna of that era, and imagine what it might have felt like to be here in the last year before the world changed forever. And if you stick around until the end, we'll compare these same locations to how they look today, to see what time has changed and what still remains. Before we set foot in Imperial Vienna, it helps to understand the context that made this extraordinary moment possible. The Austro-Hungarian Empire stretched across much of Central Europe, uniting under a single crown Austrians, Hungarians, Czechs, Poles, Croats, Slovenes, and dozens of other nationalities. Vienna was its beating heart, a city where more than a dozen languages could be heard on the streets and where only half of its inhabitants had been born there. This diversity created an unprecedented cultural melting pot, but also tensions that would soon tear the entire continent apart. The Ringstrasse dominates the urban landscape of Vienna from this era. This magnificent boulevard, stretching more than 3 miles, surrounds the historic city center, laid out over the ancient medieval walls that were demolished by order of Emperor Franz Joseph in 1857. Along this avenue rose the grandest buildings of the age, each designed in a different historical style that reflected its function. The Parliament evokes Athenian democracy with its Greek columns. The City Hall, with its Flemish Gothic towers, celebrates medieval municipal autonomy. The State Opera, inaugurated in 1869, represents the Italian Renaissance. Walking along the Ringstrasse in 1913 was to experience a compendium of European architectural history, a declaration of imperial power and ambition that still impresses those who walk it today. The Vienna State Opera was much more than a building. It was the heart of Viennese cultural life. Under the direction of Gustav Mahler, who had left the position just a few years earlier, the institution had reached artistic heights that resonated across the continent. The Viennese took pride in their musical tradition, and opera performances were social events where the aristocracy, the upper bourgeoisie, and intellectuals gathered in a ritual of culture and distinction. The works of Wagner, Mozart, and Strauss filled its halls night after night, while outside the city vibrated with the tension between tradition and modernity that would define the art of the new century. Schönbrunn Palace spread across the outskirts of the city as a testament to Habsburg power. This imperial summer residence, with its more than 1,400 rooms and meticulously designed Baroque gardens, had been the setting for Empress Maria Theresa's life and remained the preferred home of the elderly emperor Franz Joseph. In 1913, the 83-year-old emperor spent much of his time here, maintaining a Spartan routine that began before dawn, oblivious to the forces that would soon destroy everything his family had built over more than 600 years. The Gloriette crowned the hill above the gardens, offering a view that encompassed the entire city and its surroundings, a constant reminder of the imperial grandeur that the 20th century was about to sweep away. The Hofburg, in the heart of Vienna, served as the Habsburgs' winter residence and nerve center of the empire. This vast complex of palaces, chapels, and administrative buildings had grown over centuries, each generation adding new wings and halls. The Neue Burg, the most recent wing, had just been completed that very year of 1913, although the ambitious Kaiser Forum that was meant to connect it to the twin museums would never be finished. Within these walls, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the throne, maintained a tense relationship with his uncle, the Emperor, not knowing that in less than a year, a bullet in Sarajevo would unleash the catastrophe that would end all of this. St. Stephen's Cathedral, the Stephansdom, rose above the city centre as it had for more than 700 years. Its south tower, standing 448 feet high, was the tallest point on the Viennese skyline, and its 230,000 coloured tiles formed the coats of arms of the empire and the city on its famous roof. The Viennese affectionately called their cathedral the Steffel, and its bells marked the rhythm of urban life. From its watchtower, sentinels had observed the Turkish armies in 1683, and they would continue watching when the world went to war, barely a year after this image. But perhaps no place better captures the spirit of Vienna in 1913 than its famous coffee houses. Café Central, located in the Palais Ferstel, was the epicenter of Viennese intellectual life. Under its elegant arches and marble columns, writers, philosophers, architects, and revolutionaries gathered to debate, conspire, and dream of different worlds. Stefan Zweig, Arthur Schnitzler, Alfred Polgar, and Adolf Loos were regulars at these tables where coffee was served in small porcelain cups, always accompanied by a glass of water, a sign that the customer could stay as long as they wished. The poet Peter Altenburg had made the café his official postal address, receiving his correspondence there. In January of 1913, it is said that Sigmund Freud, Leon Trotsky, Joseph Stalin, and Josip Broz, the future Marshal Tito, frequented these same halls, though probably without exchanging a word among themselves. At Berggasse 19, a short distance from the center, Sigmund Freud continued his revolutionary work. Since 1891, he had lived and worked in this building, developing the theories of psychoanalysis that would forever change our understanding of the human mind. In 1913, he would publish Totem and Taboo, extending his ideas to the study of culture and religion. His patients climbed the stairs to his office, where the famous couch awaited them to explore the unknown territories of the unconscious. The Wednesday meetings, where his disciples debated cases and theories, had become the Vienna Psychoanalytic Society, and his ideas were already spreading across Europe and America, though the hostility of the traditional medical community remained fierce. While Freud explored the depths of the psyche, Gustav Klimt was transforming visual art in his Viennese studio. As the first president of the Vienna Secession, he had led the revolt against academic conservatism, creating a movement that fused art with craftsmanship and defied all conventions. His paintings, with their golden backgrounds and sensual figures, scandalized some and fascinated others. The kiss had already become an iconic image, and his portraits of upper-class Jewish women captured an elegance that would soon disappear. In 1913, he was painting The Virgin, continuing his exploration of the female body and desire that so discomforted respectable Vienna. Just a few years from his death, Klimt represented the pinnacle of a culture that did not know it was living its last days of glory. At the same time, in a men's hostel on Meldemannstrasse, in the working-class district of Brigittenau, a 24-year-old named Adolf Hitler spent his days painting watercolors of Viennese buildings that he sold to tourists and frame dealers. He had come to Vienna with dreams of becoming an artist, but the Academy of Fine Arts had rejected him twice, and now he survived in poverty, selling his small paintings of churches and government buildings for a few crowns. He lived surrounded by immigrants and workers from all over Central Europe, including several Jews who bought his works and helped him in his business dealings. In May of that year, he would receive a small inheritance and depart for Munich, leaving behind a city that had fed both his frustrated artistic dreams and the political ideas that would shape his dark future. Leon Trotsky, exiled from Russia after the failed revolution of 1905, had made Vienna his temporary home. He frequented Café Central, where he played chess and debated with other revolutionaries about the future of the socialist movement. In January of 1913, a young Georgian named Iosif Djugashvili, who would later adopt the name Stalin, arrived in Vienna under a false identity to investigate the nationalist movements of the empire and write an essay on the nationalities question. The two men who would dominate the Soviet Union met briefly here, though Trotsky would later recall his negative impression of the newcomer. And somewhere in the city, the young Croatian Josip Broz worked as a mechanic in a Daimler automobile factory, not suspecting that decades later he would rule Yugoslavia as Marshal Tito. The Secession Building, with its distinctive golden dome of laurel leaves, represented the break with the past that defined Viennese art of the era. Under the motto engraved above its entrance, "To every age its art, to every art its freedom," the secessionists had defied academic conservatism and opened the doors to new forms of expression. Although Klimt and other prominent members had left the group in 1905 after internal disputes, the building remained a symbol of the creative energy that had transformed Vienna into a capital of modernism. Klimt's Beethoven frieze remained inside, testimony to the ambition of creating a total art that would unify painting, architecture, and music. The Prater, with its famous Ferris wheel, offered an escape from the intellectual intensity of the city. This former imperial hunting ground, open to the public since the 18th century, was where Viennese of all social classes mingled in search of entertainment. The Riesenrad, the great Ferris wheel built for the World's Fair of 1897, had become a symbol of the city, lifting visitors above the gardens and offering views that stretched from the hills of the Vienna woods to the Hungarian plains to the east. Here, far from the salons and coffee houses, the city showed its more popular and vital face. The Musikverein, home of the Vienna Philharmonic, was another temple of the musical culture that made this city unique. Its Golden Hall, considered one of the most perfect acoustic spaces in the world, had been inaugurated in 1870. Here the works of great composers premiered, and the Viennese musical tradition that had begun with Haydn, Mozart and Beethoven continued with figures like Mahler, Bruckner and the young Arnold Schoenberg, whose atonal music scandalized conservative audiences as much as Klimt's paintings. The tension between tradition and innovation that defined the Vienna of that time manifested perhaps most clearly in these concerts, where audiences applauded fervently or abandoned the hall in outrage. Imagine walking through these streets in the spring of 1913. The electric streetcars, recently installed, shared the avenues with horse-drawn carriages and the first automobiles. Newspaper vendors proclaimed the news of the Balkan Wars that threatened the stability of the continent. Shop windows displayed the latest Paris fashions, while in the workshops of the Wiener Werkstätte, craftsmen created design objects that fused art and functionality. The smell of roasted coffee mingled with that of horses, and waltz melodies escaped from the ballrooms, where aristocracy and bourgeoisie spun in perfect circles, not knowing they were dancing at the edge of the abyss. This was a city of extreme contrasts. The opulence of the Ringstrasse palaces coexisted with the misery of working-class districts where entire families crammed into rooms without light or running water. The refined culture of the salons existed alongside a virulent anti-Semitism that Mayor Karl Lueger had turned into a political tool. Dreams of scientific and artistic progress clashed with the forces of nationalism that were tearing the empire apart from within. Everything that made Vienna so fascinating, its diversity, its creativity, its tension between past and future, also contained the seeds of its destruction. Now I want to bring you into the present and show you how these places look today. Thanks for being here. And if you have ideas or suggestions for future cities, share them in the comments. Let's get into it. Café Central reopened its doors in 1975 after decades of neglect, and today it receives hundreds of thousands of visitors each year who seek to experience something of that intellectual atmosphere. A wax figure of the poet Peter Altenberg greets customers at the entrance, recalling the days when this place was the salon of the Viennese intelligentsia. The arches of the Palais Ferstel remain as elegant as ever, though now the conversations at the tables tend to be about tourism rather than revolution. Coffee is still served in small cups with its glass of water, maintaining a tradition that has survived 2 world wars and the collapse of an empire. The Ringstrasse maintains its 19th century grandeur, though modern automobiles and streetcars have replaced the carriages. The State Opera was destroyed by bombing in 1945 and carefully rebuilt a decade later, reopening with a performance of Fidelio that symbolized Austria's rebirth. Schönbrunn Palace, converted into a museum after the fall of the monarchy, receives millions of visitors each year who tour the rooms where Franz Joseph spent his final days. Its Baroque gardens continue to offer refuge to Viennese seeking escape from the urban bustle, exactly as they did more than a century ago. The Stephansdom suffered severe damage in the last days of World War II, when a fire destroyed much of its interior and the great Pommerin Bell crashed to the ground. The reconstruction, financed by donations from all over Austria, was completed in 1952, and a new Pommerin cast from the metal of the original rings every New Year's Eve over a transformed city. The Sigmund Freud Museum at Berggasse 19 preserves the rooms where psychoanalysis was born, though the famous couch traveled with Freud to London when he fled the Nazis and remains there. The Secession Building, with its restored Golden Dome, continues to exhibit contemporary art under the same motto that defied academicism more than a century ago. The hostel on Meldemannstrasse, where Hitler lived, was closed in 2003 and converted into a retirement home, erasing the traces of that tenant who went from selling watercolors to destroying millions of lives. Of the revolutionaries who frequented the Viennese coffee houses, Trotsky would die assassinated in Mexico, Stalin would rule the Soviet Union with an iron fist, and Tito would hold Yugoslavia together until his death. The empire that seemed eternal in 1913 collapsed barely 5 years later, and the city that had been capital to 50 million people was reduced to governing a small alpine country. Knowing what we know now, it's strange to think how ordinary these places must have seemed at the time. The people who walked along the Ringstrasse in 1913 could not know they were living the last year of a world that would soon disappear. The coffee houses where intellectuals debated art and politics would be emptied of many of their regulars, forced into exile or murdered by the Nazis. The music that filled the concert halls would be banned for its Jewishness. All that cultural refinement, all that effervescent creativity was not enough to prevent the catastrophe that was coming. I do really appreciate you watching. Your ideas, input, and constructive feedback really do shape what comes next. Feel free to leave a comment below. Until next time.